Hello, I'm Wendy Wilson, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Realizing Potential. Today, I have with me a really, really good friend and also a respected colleague in the education space. He is known here at Albany State University just for his contributions and for someone that he really loves dearly. You'll probably guess by his last name, but certainly proud of his continued achievements throughout his career. And then, as of recently, he has published yet another book. He is none other than Dr. Stephen Peters. How are you today?
Good, Dr. Wilson. It's great to join you.
Good, good. Glad to have you again on the show. Tell those, it's a small number of viewers I know, briefly a little bit about your career as a superintendent. You retired a few years ago, so you certainly are well aware of what is required, expected in the mini needs within the K through 12 space. So give us a little insight into your career background, and then we'll talk about your book.
Yeah, so I wish retired was literal for me. I no longer sit in the superintendent seat, but I train superintendents, coach superintendents, do a lot of keynotes for education associations dealing with leadership in the K-12 space. Um, excuse me. As you can tell by my voice, I've been in different climates for the past week, from Midwest to East Coast, and finally back on the ground here in Georgia. I'm happy to be here. But 2020 was my last year as a sitting superintendent. But I started in education 42 years ago as a classroom teacher, and then became an assistant principal, a director of principals as a director of secondary education. And then after 13 years of training educators around the country, I decided to go back on the front lines of the work as a high school principal because I'd never done that. And I think it's important for those of us who are practitioners to be able to help people navigate the space of leadership. We need to have done it ourselves, right? So after being away for 13 years, I decided to go back on the front lines of the work to do something that I hadn't done. And that was serving in the capacity of a high school principal. During that time, the BBC in London contacted us and wanted to film a documentary about a tough high school in America. And they followed us for a year. Excuse me. They followed us for a year and they filmed the documentary American High School, a school in the South, which was then purchased by National Geographic Television. It won the European Best Documentary in Education in 2016. And then I was asked to apply for the position of superintendent in a county in South Carolina where I grew up. And I successfully was chosen and voted in and sworn in and did that until 2020. Now I'm back out full time. So retirement might be from the superintendency, but certainly not from the work itself. And I am working all over the country again, helping to empower leaders to really lead with courage and conviction.
Outstanding, outstanding. And so I know you're still hearing lots of stories that are probably comparable to your experiences and your observations when you were either before the classroom teaching or, in the administrative side. And I'm sure some of them are still very disappointing. Every time you and I have a conversation about your background, I'm always reminded of one of my it's a very riveting book,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you've read it. I know we've discussed it before, but Jonathan Kozol's Savage Inequalities.
Mhm. Yes,
And
yes.
I'm just still blown away that, that book is probably, I'm sure, over some 25 years old at this point, at this juncture. but there's still references in the book about the inequalities throughout the United States with the school system, and how they are still resonating today. It's still a reality. Sewage coming down the classroom, and I mean, the list goes on. So, what are you hearing when you're speaking to your colleagues that are now in the superintendent seats across the country? I'm hopefully you will tell me that it's gotten better. But
I wish I could. I think you're absolutely spot on. That book is right on my bookshelf behind me. It is a book that I often refer to because it is a constant reminder of the fact that that still exists in the reality of now. What he wrote about, talked about, and actually lived. Jonathan Kozel actually moved into neighborhoods of poor, disadvantaged students to literally see when they get up, when they go to bed, what they eat, what they don't have to eat. And Savage Inequalities really spoke to a lens that many people don't get to see because they don't experience that.
sure.
When I wrote the book, Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me? It was on the heels of that work that Kozel did. And a constant reminder that, as James Comer says from Yale, Dr. James Comer from Yale University, no significant teaching and learning can take shape in the absence of a significant relationship. And Kozel spoke to those relationships, but he also spoke to the landscape and the environment and culture that many disadvantaged kids come up with. It also speaks volumes to what many people run from today, and that is the conversation on equity, the vast inequalities that many of our children deal with in public schools in America. Yeah. And we have to go beyond a conversation. We have to initiate action at some point to change the narrative.
I agree. We're dealing with that. In fact, we were in a meeting yesterday. The president is very concerned about the challenges that we're seeing many of our students are experiencing. Your lovely wife, also our amazing provost here at Albany State University, was a part of that conversation with our deans and some other key administrators here, and we're seeing that they are challenged once they enter into the classroom, whether it be just with some of the core competencies, no fault of their own, to the point that you just made, that it's what is actually taking place in that K through 12 space. And I know systems have to deal with absolutely so much, and they are directly impacted by the social ills within the society. And so, children come with all kinds of unimagined challenges, and then the expectation is that they partake and engage in the level of instruction and then retain it. And then once they enter the doors of whether it be a Howard, Harvard, Albany State University, be expected to perform. But again, if they've not been given the level of instruction and development that they so richly deserve, that taxpayer dollars are put toward, then here we are. So we're working to address that and meet them where they are.
Yeah, the challenge, Dr. Wilson, is, I'm sure you've seen the meme, and those memes of putting boxes to assist children who might be shorter than the taller student, to be able to see over the fence, right? So the challenge now is getting rid of the fence. Forget about the boxes for students to stand on to give them a view over the fence. The challenge for institutions and agencies in our country now is to get rid of the fence so that students don't need those boxes to stand on. And that is a challenge that I issue everywhere I go. And this requires careful planning and skillful execution of that plan.
Excellent. Let's shift a little bit. Certainly your heart remains in education, regardless the area, meaning K through 12, post-secondary education. You're there to assist and serve and then guide. But your recent book, or your latest book, kind of had a little slight shift, certainly centered in education, but more of a leadership focus. Share with the viewers your inspiration, a little more about the book,
Yeah.
its title, and how it's making an impact.
Right. Yeah. So it's an appropriate title. The title is One, and the subtitle is A Process for Building Schools of Excellence for Everyone, the individual, and everyone, the collective. And I partnered and co-authored this book with the great Dr. Mark Wilson, who was in 2008, 2009, the National Principal of the Year. And he was working in Georgia during that time. And I delivered the keynote address at the announcement in Washington, D.C., when it was announced that he won that award. And we've been really doing a lot of work together ever since then. And so Mark and I thought that it was timely with all that was happening around our country, a year and a half ago, to really write a book entitled One. It's an education book. It's a leadership lens with climate culture at its core, but the power of individuals that came through during the pandemic, if you think about the custodians and the roles that they took, the bus drivers, when students couldn't get to school and they had no hot spots in neighborhoods, and how many millions of children were fed, regardless of them being at home and not able to come into school because of the pandemic. Support staff really took on a new meaning in terms of they've always been important and underpaid, but I think the pandemic really issued some harsh lessons to not only the K-12 space, but higher ed as well. I mean,
Oh,
we learned so
absolutely.
much about the power of one, right? Synergy is defined as the efforts of more than one far outweigh the efforts of one. And that certainly rang true during that time, and still to this day rings true. So Mark and I thought it was not only relevant to write a book of this nature, but to stress the importance of making sure that we sustain that lens about how important it is for one person, the individual, the leaders, the presidents, the superintendents, the principals, the teachers, the students, but also the importance of everyone, the institutions, the agencies, the colleges, universities, and schools.
Yeah. So you mentioned the pandemic and where the world had to shift and adjust to what was just, the world turned upside down for about a 2-year period. And I was recalling some of the major things that all of us had to do. And you mentioned the synergy, and so I'm
Mhm.
reminded of our Ken Dyer, and Ken, his team gathered together, and I going home for whatever reason, or just being out, and you would see school buses and they were feeding children that way. Um, because again, we just assume, because we are very fortunate and blessed, that everyone has access, and then we know that they do not, to be able to go into the refrigerator and eat. Then parents are working, so that was provided. The hotspot, we had to provide that service to many of our students. I recall them coming on campus just to sit in their cars to be able to take advantage of that, because the digital divide is still so pervasive throughout this country. So yes, absolutely. And I read your book. Gosh, last year. The time is flying by. But you made several excellent points, and we cannot operate in silos or independently. It does absolutely take a collective to complete the work that is before us, even start the work
Mhm.
that is before us.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I mean, many people realize the enormous challenges that we have before us, even now. A lot of people think the pandemic and the impact or effects of it, it's over. It's not over.
Not
I see it in my work every day with principals and superintendents and sometimes teachers. In a
Mhm.
sense, if you look at the numbers would indicate that we have teachers leaving this profession at an alarming rate. The average tenure for a superintendent in our country right now is 2.5 years. I mean, that's not enough time to really get the work going and starting. When we wrote one, I think one of the first segments of the book talks about the power of one. And then the next segment that comes behind it is the promise of everyone, right? I mean, that's powerful when people can come together in a circle. And you've often heard me say, if you're the smartest person in your circle, you need a new circle,
Indeed.
right? You mentioned Mr. Ken Dyer, who's superintendent of Dougherty County Schools. He's one of the great ones. I just said yesterday to a group of leaders in Dougherty County how blessed they are, how fortunate they are. And he works in concert with your um, president, Dr. Frederick. And, they worked and created synergy during that time, and they sustain those efforts to this day because as they work together, the power of everyone really feeds the promise for everyone. And in business, they talk about ROI, return on investment. In education, we talk about ROI as it pertains to the return on impact. And right now, we have to make sure that we're making positive impacts on students, but we've got to make sure that we make positive impact on those who provide services to students. And this is a time when people are not well, and we have to really address the issue of mental health of people, of the adults and the students. And there was a push for social emotional efforts for students, but we also have to pay attention to how our adults are doing. And that's a push right now for people to really check in as they're being trained through this initiative out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, that I am a part of now. It's called Initiative One Leadership Institute, and it is transformative. It is helping leaders to become self-aware that when you get the title of a superintendent or a president or whatever your title may be, that humility is really the new smart. And we need to pay attention and become self-aware and reminded, I think more importantly, Dr. Wilson, that leadership is not about you or me. Leadership is about how you're developing other leaders and influencing other leaders. So this is an exciting venture to empower people to really take those things that are under the table and put them on top of the table and not be afraid, but to courageously deal with those issues in concert, in collaboration with other people. Because I think one of the greatest lessons the pandemic taught us and continues to teach us is that we can no longer do this work in isolation. That I can't do it alone, you can't do it alone, President Frederick can't do it alone, Mr. Dyer can't do it alone, but we can do it together and we can do it better.
Absolutely. That's going to be critically important that we adopt and maintain that mindset. When you were speaking, I'm just reminded, so many individuals across, certainly in this country, but across the world, experience, daily traumas that's coupled with, so we talked about the savage inequalities prior to the pandemic. So then we all had this major trauma of the pandemic. And again, the expectation is that we just still continue on. So the piece about the exercising humility
Mm.
is going to be so important, because what it says is that we are human. We continue to be impacted by a lot. And in order to navigate, I'm so exhausted by the word survive. We need to transition to, but so many still are, that we can begin to thrive. That can only occur with just that honest dialogue, bringing their whole selves to the moment, their whole selves being accepted by our colleagues, so that our children can mirror those behaviors. This is exactly who I am. These are my needs. I know you have these expectations, but in order for that to occur successfully, and then we can move, yeah, it's going to have to occur, as you said, with some humility, some honest dialogue, and then that collective bond.
Yeah, I think this is a season of grace, of asking for it and extending it to people, not as an excuse that, wow, this work can't be done. I think 50% of doing the work is believing it can be done, but it has to be done in concert with other people. And you and I both know the value and the power of teams. Teams together, everyone achieves more, right? But when we have individuals who step out and they are trying to make a name for themselves, or get the claps or the likes on social media, or how many people viewed their post, that's an individual approach that doesn't work. It just really erodes the process of how powerful we can impact the lives of young people. And as we think about a season of grace, we also have to think that this is a time where we need partnerships. That if we can no longer do this work in isolation, then how do we partner with others, other agencies, other people, people who have talents that really don't exist in our circle right now? And we've got to be able to aggressively seek partnerships with people. I can't help but think about the success that we were able to garner in school buildings when I was a principal, or in all of our campuses when I was a superintendent. And I see Mr. Dyer doing the same thing. And that is because he understands the power of partnerships, partnerships with parents, wherein traditionally and historically in our country, parents have been consumers of public education. And now the shift is to make them partners in education versus consumers of public education. And the same thing with our students. How powerful would it be that on every campus, university or college campus, and by the way, you mentioned Hampton when you were mentioning Harvard, Howard, ASU. Hampton is that other school that you forgot about to mention, so I'll mention that. But how powerful would it be to have our students help us lead and manage these institutions?
Oh, wow.
I mean, I think that the issue that we have is not that our expectations are too high for our students. I think our expectations are too low, and they are rising to those low expectations every day. But we have young people in our country right now who are more than ready to step in and partner with us in this work. And I am prayerful that in my lifetime, I will see shining examples of young people helping us lead, helping us manage the chaos, because I truly believe in my heart that we are faced with opportunities brilliantly disguised as impossibilities. All of these challenges that we face right now are opportunities for us to do better, to be better, and deliver a better standard of quality to young people in our country.
Excellent thought. I fully agree with that. I'll send you your check because I'm going to have to adopt that and use that a few times. I love that. Yeah, that is so spot on. So it's just, as we've been saying all along, it's a mind shift that we have to, and then with intentional work to follow with that. So before we wrap up,
Yes.
just two things. I need the name of the book again, where our viewers can purchase the book, and what author do you go to that brings you that or provides that added push or motivation that we
Well,
so often need?
those are great. You always ask great questions,
Well,
right?
thank you, sir.
So first, the book is one. Um, it's written, co-authored by Dr. Mark Wilson, and you can find it on my website or his, principalleadership.com, drstephenpeters.com, or of course, Amazon. And when we think about authors or work, it's very, very difficult for me to name one or two because I get so much from so many sources. I've got a book behind me right now on the bookshelf that is so old. I think it was published in the early 70s. It's a conversation between Dr. James Comer of Yale University and Dr. Ron Edmonds of Harvard University, two African American males in the early 70s. And it's them doing what you and I are doing right now. It's like question, answer, conversation. And I find myself going to that source very, very often because, as you mentioned, with the Koza work, they were way ahead of their times, but also sadly and interesting to note that some of those same issues from 3 decades ago, we're still dealing with, and some of them at full throttle.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the alarming part, is that those issues from 20, 30 years ago, we're still dealing with them now. They have manifested in so many ways. It reminds me of the research that I did for Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me, which highlights the 5 major influences on school-age children in America: homeschool, peer influence, church, and television. And to see the flip of what used to be 1, 2, and 3 now being 3, 4, and 5, we get a picture of why we're dealing with what we're dealing with, not only in our schools or on our school campuses, but in our society as large. So I have so many multiple sources. I find myself going to the book also. What got you here won't get you there, and I know you've read that, and many of your cabinet members have read that. But that title, in and of itself, would indicate and challenge us to realize that the work that we did to get where we are right now won't get us to that next level. And more importantly, the next level of leadership always requires a different version of the leader now. And so the question I ask leaders: are you doing the work that will cultivate the change that you need to present the best version of yourself at that next level? And if the answer is yes, kudos to those. But if it's no, you need to get started.
Work to be done. Some work
Yes.
to be done. Dr. Stephen Peters, it is always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you for extending me some grace. We were actually supposed to do this in person. I had this grand resurgence, if you will, of the Timbuktu Book Festival that I have done probably about 15
Mhm.
years ago. And I still have plans on doing that,
Awesome.
and just bringing great authors into the room and sharing your stories and your
Mhm.
inspiration for the book and hopefully inspiring others. So we are going to find a day, but I did not want to miss this opportunity.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, share your great work and your achievements and your contributions to not only just the educational space, to the world, to our viewers, to kind of give them an update. So, thank you for
Mhm.
extending your time this morning. Know that you are always welcome back
Thank
on
you
the
so much.
show.
Go Rams.
Absolutely. Viewers, thank you so much for joining me for this edition of Realizing Potential. I'm Wendy Wilson, and I look forward to seeing you next time.